Welcome to Rise Me Up, a podcast about Asian Europeans from all walks of life. I'm your host Ching, a German-born Chinese. Today I have with me Linda Tuelindo, a Czech-Vietnamese business owner. Linda spent several years in management consulting and tech abroad before returning to Prague to start her own business in fall 2019. She's currently overseeing multiple restaurants. Linda is also openly and proudly lesbian. Since sexual identity is a topic that is rarely talked about in Asian families and also one that brings with it its own challenges, I'm particularly happy to welcome Linda on the show. I hope that her unique story will inspire others to embrace themselves more fully, whether that be from a cultural, sexual, or any other perspective. Thank you very much for taking the time, Linda.
Thank you, Jing, for having me and for your kind words. I want to state in the beginning that I'm very glad you created Rise Me Up. I think that our experience, the Asian European one, is such a specific thing to go through. And I'm glad that somebody is shedding more light into it and that there's a platform for us to share our stories and learn about each other.
Thank you, Linda. So, a couple of years ago, you moved back to Prague to start your own business here. What was it actually like for you to grow up in Prague in the first place?
Overall, I would say that it was great to be able to grow up here in Czech Republic. It wasn't always in Prague, but later in life, it was mostly Prague. Back in my childhood, that is the 1990s, the Vietnamese community here in the Czech Republic started to grow in size. But generally, on average, for a Czech person, it was still quite rare to meet us on the street, let's say, let alone interact with us on some deeper level. I would say it started with my generation. Let's call us the first generation that were born here. When we started going to school, that's when our classmates and teachers would have the opportunity to get to really know us better and interact with us. So around elementary school also for me is when my parents became quite busy with working on starting their business, and so it was mostly after school just me and my younger sister hanging out. And eventually, when it became necessary, we had a Czech aunties, we would call them Czech aunties, who would become our nannies, because our parents didn't really have time to even watch us after school. So that's when gradually Czech culture began to seep into our lives. You were going to Czech school, you had Czech classmates, then Czech friends, you were watching Czech TVs. And around that time is when these two cultures, I would say, started mixing for me. And as children, we were told by my parents to behave well under any circumstances. Don't bring any unwanted attention to you. You have to represent and don't put an extra bad image on us, since we are kind of like foreigners living in this country. So that was the kind of mindset that we were taught. And looking back at that period now, I realized that around this time is when I kind of a little bit started rejecting my Vietnamese self, I would say, the Vietnamese culture. And I thought to be liked and to be accepted by my peers, who were mostly Czech, because there weren't really that many Vietnamese kids my age around me. To be accepted and to be, liked, I have to be more Czech than Vietnamese, basically. I have to be like them. And I should be the least Vietnamese that I could. I think one of your guests on the podcast actually used a phrase that I associated basically with this period is self-erasure, basically. I don't know if she meant it in the same way, but I would probably call it that what I was doing unconsciously. So I was kind of erasing part of myself to please somebody else. And of course, looking back at it now with some hindsight, it is unfortunate, it is sad, right? Nobody told me to do that. That kid in me decided that's what she had to do. And so that part, of course, was unfortunate, but luckily later in life, I started, of course, embracing again more both parts of me. I am both Czech and Vietnamese, and I don't repress any of that anymore. So that was, for me, that was my personal experience, what it was like to grow up in Prague.
Yeah, I think it's very natural, especially as a child or a teenager growing up, to want to fit in. I think everyone experiences it to an extent, but I think when you're between different cultures, it's like an easy way to fit in even more, right? If you're not part of the dominant culture, to reject your own culture, which is in the minority. But since you mentioned that you rejected the Vietnamese parts of you and tried to become more Czech, I was actually wondering which behaviors or like cultural things that were Vietnamese did you start rejecting, and how did you become more Czech? Which behaviors or like things did you start adopting or embracing more that made you more Czech from your own perspective?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'm trying to think of some examples. Yeah, so when I was going to elementary school or high school, there was always the breaks where you would have, for example, snacks. So most kids, they would bring whatever their moms prepared for them. And for us, sometimes, even though my mom was so busy, she managed to make food for us to bring to school. And sometimes it was like traditional Vietnamese stuff. Bánh mì, the sandwiches, which is perfectly fine. It's like a delicious food. But back then, those were things that the kids around me didn't really know. And you know how kids can be. If there's something different, they pry and they ask. And I, for some reason, started getting kind of ashamed for bringing like quote unquote weird food to school. And so I stopped doing that, and I started like just buying stuff from the grocery stores. So that's like one example. And I've heard this even with my like Vietnamese peers, like that's not just my experience. I've heard my friends also doing that as well. And me personally, I somehow felt that I shouldn't associate with other Vietnamese kids. For example, like just make Czech friends, don't make Vietnamese friends. Be like them, don't associate with other Vietnamese people. And that is super sad in a way, like that the kid thought that. And now I realize that a lot of the choices I made back then were affected by this mindset. And it was like, of course, not right. So those are some of the examples I could think of.
Yeah, the food example I've actually heard a lot, but now that I think about it, I actually never had that problem because when I was small, there were virtually no Asian supermarkets or Asians around us. So I just brought ordinary sandwiches to school and I only had German friends because there were no Asians. But yeah, Linda, you mentioned that you made a lot of realizations later in life and that in hindsight, there are a lot of decisions that were affected by your subconscious beliefs. But when did you actually start thinking more actively about your sexual and cultural identity?
I think my sexual identity that came first around when I was 18 years old is when I had my first then girlfriend. So that naturally triggered all these questions regarding my sexual identity. Regarding the cultural part, actually, I think that came later. That realization came, I would say, like when I was 25. So I would say quite later in life. And so for quite a long time of my life, that was just like an autopilot mode that I was on. And I didn't really realize it later. And that I would say was triggered by my then girlfriend, who was very helpful in helping me basically look more deep inside and kind of be more self reflective on the inner world. It's something that I was really quite bad at, to be honest, for a long time. I didn't really question my emotions and my deep thoughts and the deep world that is inside of you, something that I wasn't really taught by anyone from my family. And so actually it was my then partner who helped me with this.
Was she also of Asian heritage, or was it just the questions that she asked?
It was the second one. It was the question that she asked. She was actually Czech, so she wasn't Asian.
Interesting. And since you mentioned that your first girlfriend was the one who made you reflect more on your cultural and sexual identity, how did you even go from thinking about your sexual identity to having your first girlfriend?
So around, I would say, when your teenage years began, so 12, 13, or 14, that was the period of time when I started noticing that I like girls. But at that time, I didn't grasp the fact that that's a little bit strange, maybe. I just thought, okay, this is like what is happening. And then on the, border of 14, 15, I kind of realized, oh, but other girls only like boys. The people around me don't really feel like me. And so I started realizing, oh, that's a bit weird. not a bit weird, that's a lot weird. Like, okay, so what does it really mean? And the term lesbian or gay wasn't in my vocabulary yet. It's not something children think about or understand really. So I just understood at that time, okay, I'm different, yeah, like in a way. And already back then, I kind of felt some sadness about it. I remember like sadness in the sense, okay, why am I different, like different from everybody else? Because that's weird, that's what I thought. And I was sad about it. And as the years went by and puberty happens, and now you start to get all these, understanding of the concepts, homosexuality and bisexuality and, asexuality. There are so many things, and you get crushes on people, you feel now it's like a crush on a girl. It's not a crush on a boy. And I keep just having crushes on girls. So what does it mean? And so gradually, naturally, it happens over, I would say, a longer period of time. You kind of learn on the go. And so when I had a name for it and I understood inside, okay, what is happening, I came out to my friends. Basically, everybody was amazing. Everybody was super supportive. I have to say, I'm quite lucky that I didn't have really that many, let's say, negative experiences regarding that. And so when I got my first serious girlfriend at age 18 is when I decided to come out to my parents as well.
And how did that go?
When the time came, I decided to sit down with my mother and basically tell her that, hi, mom, I have a girlfriend. That was my plan. And so one night, it was just me and my mom there. I planned to say that. And although it was planned, it took me quite a long time before I actually physically could say the words. Like, she was sitting across me and she knew I wanted to tell her something important. I had to take the time and the courage to basically say it out loud. Even though I have to say, on some level, I knew that they wouldn't disown me or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. How did you know?
It's because of the way my parents are, I guess. I knew that they love us, and I would say that they do love us unconditionally. I never felt that our parents would need to fulfill any kind of dreams or ambitions through us, or have the need to show off in front of their friends or whoever through us. I'm not saying that this is what I got the feeling about most other Vietnamese parents around, but I knew from my other peers at that time that some of them did have the weight of certain expectations that their parents put on them. You have to be really good at school, you have to do some respectable job, and a lot of them had these expectations put on them, but our parents were never really like that. They told us, you have to study well for yourself. If you screw up, you are screwing yourself. So just do well for you. I don't care what kind of grades you get, but just do it for yourself. And so I knew that it's not gonna be like a deal breaker. It was still an unpleasant conversation, don't get me wrong. When I told her, my mother's reaction, she started crying, and it was because she was sad for me. Oh my God, you're gonna have such a hard life. Are you sure you're not bisexual? Do you need to go to talk to a psychiatrist? Do you need a doctor to help you with the condition? I'm like, no, I'm fine, mom. I don't have any condition. And so she was sad, and of course, seeing her sad, that made me sad. But all in all, the coming out conversation was good. She said, okay, it's gonna be a hard life. Maybe you should consider leaving Czech Republic eventually, because here it's not still that accepted as in some other countries. That was already some of the things she said back then. And then she asked me, you know what, you don't have to tell your dad. I will tell him. It's a bit typical for them in a way. She was maybe for some reason stressed that she should handle this conversation with him. But to be honest, my dad is even more chill than my mom, so it was okay.
That's so nice. I really like the way you described your parents' approach to parenting. I think it's actually something that people from all cultures can take away from your example, because I think it's not just Asian parents who tend to have very high expectations of their children, but I think there's a tendency for immigrant parents in particular to have that feeling of, I never got to live this or that, I want my kids to have that experience, but not realizing that sometimes by doing that, you accidentally make them feel like you're placing a condition on them being loved and accepted by you. But yeah, I think it's so nice that your parents gave you that feeling of unconditional love that encouraged you to be so open with them about who you are. But since your mom mentioned bisexuality, out of curiosity, growing up, did you never have a crush on a guy?
In the true sense of a crush, I didn't. I remember that I did have a poster of a Korean pop singer. I thought he was really cool. I really liked the music, and I put the poster there. And before I came out, people thought, "Oh, that's really cute. Like, it's, what you do. You put like a singer in your bedroom." But it wasn't a crush. It was just like admiration.
I see. Well, that makes it so much easier, right? If you only ever had crushes on girls and women. But Linda, how would you say your life has changed since coming out? Has it changed at all? Because you mentioned that your parents accepted it quite fast and your friends were very supportive. But your life overall, has it affected your relationships and identity in any shape and form?
I really like this question. It's because the answer to that, I think, can be quite telling. How has my life changed since coming out is phrased like it happened during like a certain point of a time, and then there's a before and then there's after. But truth be told, for I think most queer people, coming out is something that we do on a regular basis. It's not just the time we told our parents, it's like one of the big milestones for sure, because they are one of the most important people in your life. But you come out on a regular basis. For example, if you would go to a new work, most people will assume that you're hetero. They're not going to assume that you are gay or lesbian. And so this happens all the time. You have to kind of decide, oh, okay, who do I tell? Some people are so out, they don't really like think about it. They just say it. And that's, I think, the most amazing thing. But sometimes there are situations where you have to think about like, okay, do I want to tell this person? Is it safe to tell this person? Do I need to tell this person? And so coming out is something that happens on a regular basis. And for me personally, I am lucky enough to live here in Europe, in Czech Republic. And so it's mostly been positive or neutral experiences, which is preferable. So for me, I wouldn't say that it has affected my relationships. Of course, if I meet somebody who, for example, outright says something homophobic to my face, I will usually maybe confront them, but I would probably not become deeper acquaintances or friends with them because their values and my values are not the same. So in that sense, it has maybe affected my relationships. I don't really associate with people like that. But then people around me are all great people, amazing people who share the same values. And so I don't have any clashes there or anything like that.
And Linda, because you mentioned that your mom started crying and was like, Linda, maybe you should move out of the Czech Republic because it's still not that accepted here and that you're going to have such a hard life. Did that turn out to be true? Or like, what unique challenges would you say do you face as a lesbian Czech-Vietnamese person in Prague? And also, are you considering like moving elsewhere at some point in time, or are you happy to stay where you are?
The thing that my mom said, it came out from like a good place, and it came up from a place of worry of a mother for for her child, for her daughter. I think it is not really based on the reality, though, of what it's like now to live in Czech Republic as a queer person. Generally, compared to many, many places in the world, it is very safe in the sense that it's not illegal. I'm not going to go to jail because of it, and I can have a really normal life here. Of course, bad people can be found anywhere throughout any part of the world. So there are unfortunate incidents here as well in the Czech Republic of even violence against queer people. But me, in my 31 years that I've lived here, I had basically just really one quite unpleasant experience myself where I was being physically threatened for just holding the hand of my girlfriend in like a public transport. We were doing nothing else, but we were just like holding our hands. And so this guy, he was really angry about it and he started really being aggressive and shouting at us. Clearly, he had some mental issues, I would say. That is the only moment when I felt kind of a little bit like in physical danger. But other than that, I would say that it's really generally quite good to live here as a queer person. Of course, there are probably a little bit better options, I would say. I lived in Sweden, I lived in China. I eventually really was glad to be able to come back home. This is basically where I feel the most at home. So the answer is, if in the future the rights of queer people here would be somehow lessened, if there are some laws that would make it harder for me to live, then yes, I would consider leaving. But right now, I'm happy here.
I'm very happy to hear that, Linda. But also, what was your experience in China like?
So I went to China for work, basically. Back then I was a management consultant, and there was a big project in Tianjin, which is quite close to Beijing. And that was like a 1+ year project. So I agreed to go there. And back then I had a girlfriend and we just started dating. So it turned into like a long distance relationship, basically, where I was working in China and she was working here in the Czech Republic. So in that sense, I couldn't really compare what it would be like to live as a queer person in China and here. She did come to visit me eventually towards the end of the project, and we traveled a little bit through some of the places. And when I was there with her, I felt safe. I felt okay. I think, although the reason is that if you are with like a European person, then they are gonna assume that you're probably like a foreigner or not local, right? So I didn't really feel any prejudice or judgment. If I was not with her, I was alone with my colleagues. They always assumed I was Chinese and started talking Chinese to me. It was so kind of disheartening to really disappoint them, because I really spoke only a couple words Chinese. So I always had to say, no, I'm from Vietnam. And even at that point, they would try to write in the Chinese letters because they thought maybe I speak a different dialect and I just don't understand the spoken word. So they started writing on their phone and showing me. And I'm like, I'm so sorry, I don't understand like what you're trying to tell me. So that was funny. That was really funny. And they always assumed I was Chinese and speaking Chinese to me, which is really great. Like, yeah.
Yeah. That is so funny. I was actually going to ask you about it, but you already said that. Yeah, because I have like a lot of like Vietnamese friends here in Berlin now, and like I must say like some of them also looks like somewhat Chinese, and for me myself, like some people think that I'm like Korean or like Japanese, and people think it's like foreigners, like white people thinking that, but no, it's actually Asian people coming to me and being like, "Hey, are you Korean?" You know, I mean, there's also so much common history that we actually share. Vietnamese people, Chinese people, and like some other countries as well that people are not aware of. I find it funny when people say like, oh, I can definitely distinguish them. Yeah, there are certain characteristics that sometimes help people distinguish them. But truth be told, Asia is so diverse, even within a country, that it is often hard to tell just based on looks, I think, where they're from. Yeah.
Yeah, I have definitely also been very often like misnationalized. Yeah, in Vietnam, they often think I'm not Vietnamese. Oh, you're so tall, you must be Korean or Thai. And in Thailand, they thought the same. So I guess, yes, you can to a certain extent maybe tell, but not always. And China is such a big country, and there's so many types of ethnicities. So it's not always easy, even among your own people.
Yeah, definitely. But speaking of people, Linda, how did your wider family actually react to you coming out? Because I just had to think of my own family, and I feel like everyone asked me about very personal things all the time, like, oh, do you have a boyfriend yet? When are you going to get married? When are you going to have children? And so on. So I figured that it would probably be very difficult to hide that, right? Or to avoid these conversations.
So back when I was coming out to my parents, the thing that my mother basically asked me was that I do not tell that to the wider family. Back then, the explanation was, our grandmothers, they're like old school, they wouldn't understand, and you just keep it to yourself. And back then, I was fine with that. I didn't really need to come out to them. I wanted to come out to my parents because I cared that they know, but I don't have the closest relationship, for example, with the family that is in Vietnam. There's language barrier, there's cultural barrier, and I used to meet them like once per year when I was little, and now even less with like school and work. So a lot of the wider family is, I would say, quite like strangers to me, and I'm a stranger to them basically. Now, as for example, 4 years ago, I started working with my parents, and then a lot of our relatives also work with us, aunties, cousins, for example. It became kind of harder to like not talk about these things. I think a lot of the times Asian aunties and uncles, they can be very nosy. And so, of course, where's your boyfriend? Do you have a boyfriend already? When are you going to get married? And, I'm 31 and I'm the oldest daughter. So, of course, there's like expectations, right? Why is she not married yet? Where are the children and stuff like that, right? Of course, same experience. And so when they ask me that, they used to ask me that a lot more when I was younger. But now I think that it's become quite acknowledged. Most of the relatives here on this side, I mean, in Europe, they already know this about me because people gossip. And I'm fine with it. Like, nobody has been negative about it to me. And so if they ask me, I will just say that I'm not looking for a boyfriend. I already have somebody, and I use it like in a neutral term. You can say I have a partner, and you don't really know if you're talking about a boyfriend or a girlfriend. If it's somebody like I don't really want to talk into more details. And most of the relatives here, they already know that. And so it's more like the relatives that are over in Vietnam. They are not fully in the picture, perhaps, but I'm fine with the way things are. I don't need to be shouting shouting about it any more than I already am.
I see. And how do you think about motherhood? Is having children something that you want? And how do you think about it?
Ooh, wow. You're not touching on a on a very loaded topic. So for me personally, for a long time, part of my life, I kind of thought, yeah, I'm gonna become a mother one day and I will have children. But in the last couple of years, to be honest, I have been quite challenging this thought in myself. So I started thinking about it. So where does it come from? This what you thought, most of your life. Do you really want children? And is that something that is in the stars for you, basically? And the answer right now is that I do not want children. It's not something that my parents actually know yet officially, but I don't think that they're gonna hear it on this podcast. Of course, they're hoping for grandchildren, very eager for grandchildren, but honestly, I don't think that is something that I want to do. And my partner doesn't want children either. So this is currently basically our mindset. We would really rather regret not having children than regret having the children. They deserve better. And the mindset is, of course, if we change our minds in the future, there's always adoption as an option. And so this is my attitude towards motherhood now.
And are you planning to actively tell your parents?
Right. So I think eventually, yes. To me, telling them this news is quite the same level of stress as coming out, I would say. The reason being that they've always expected to be grandparents. Like, they still have chance with my youngest sisters, right? But like, since I'm the oldest one, the highest expectations are currently on me. And so it's kind of something that might disappoint them in a way. For the past couple of years, I've been quite dreading this, like being, stressed because of this. But honestly, lately I've had a mindset change where I know that I'm going to tell them one day. And it's just the realization that, you have to live your life for you. Mainly, it's you cannot live it for other people. Parents shouldn't expect their children to have children. This is really up to the person to decide if they are fit to be a parent, if they want to be a parent, if they want to have a child. It's a really big commitment, nowadays with everything going on, like everything becoming more expensive, hard, to find like housing, affordable housing. I mean, having a child is even, like, I would say, a more important decision to make. And so you should make it based on really what you feel that you want and not what other people want from you.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I also don't think that parents should have a say in whether or not their children have children because, like you said, it's such an important and personal decision to make. Yeah, funny enough, in my case, I mean, I'm pretty sure I do want to have children, but it's exactly because my mom is being so noisy about it in recent years that it actually makes me wonder to what extent I want it for me and to what extent I want it because I've been raised a certain way. But, anyways, after all that you've experienced, Linda, what advice would you give to others struggling with their cultural and or sexual identity?
Based on my experience, I think it could be applied both to the cultural identity and sexual identity, is basically you owe it to yourself to look into yourself and ask the questions of, like, when am I truly, like, free? When am I truly unapologetically myself? What is it that makes me feel like I'm at home, right? Whether it be like my Vietnamese culture, my Czech culture, both of them together side by side, whether it be that I like boys or I like girls or I like neither, or anything on the spectrum, to question, like, okay, the way I am right now, the way I am doing things, is this because I want to do them like for me? Am I doing it for somebody else? Am I pleasing somebody else? You look into yourself and you ask yourself these questions and you get the answers and you will find out eventually. It doesn't have to happen overnight, right? Like, it's not really a sprint, it's a marathon. You get to know yourself gradually over time. Of course, with time comes more maturity. So it's okay to feel like you don't have everything figured out immediately. And if possible, and you have the opportunities, just like be true to yourself so that you can walk without regrets, right? Like without feeling like you're missing out on something.
Since you mentioned freedom, Linda, what does freedom mean to you?
I guess like the absence of fear, maybe. I used to be, when I was younger, afraid, for example, of walking on the streets and holding my girlfriend with her hand, or like, kissing my partner out in public, just fearing like the reaction, like the attention it would bring to me, like the negative attention. So that was something that I experienced for quite a long time. And so for me, I had to change like the mindset later in life, that, and as I said, that came with maturity, where I realized, in 100 years, if you think about that time span, you will be dead. Most of the people who know you will be dead. And so you yourself, like whatever your life and everything connected to you, it will be just like a memory, or not even that. You might be forgotten by then. And so all the things that I worry about, the fears that I have, they are really silly if you think about it. In context of, 100 years, this really doesn't matter. Like the things you worry about now, they don't really matter. And so, just do whatever makes you happy.
I had this exact same conversation with a friend yesterday, the fact that we're all gonna die. I mean, it's a realization that a lot of us make and passing very early on, but then the real gravity of that statement and that fact, it doesn't really dawn on people until like much later in life, when they realize, okay, a lot of the things that I worry about, they don't actually matter. And yeah, I was smiling because we're talking about it in the context of like overthinking, because we're both like very introspective people, and we realize, okay, introspection is good to an extent. Like everything is good to an extent. Balance is always key. And if you are someone who thinks a lot, reflects a lot, like my friend and I, and as it seems like you too, then it is sometimes helpful to draw a line and to say to yourself, okay, now enough is enough. I'm not going to think about this any longer, because it can actually make things worse to think about it too much. So that is the advice that you would give to other people. But like, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Actually, I think that piece of advice that I just mentioned, like the silly things that I worried as a younger person. Oh my God, I cannot hold her hand, or, I cannot be truly myself in front of people. That is something that my younger self would really benefit from, like to let go of that fear, let go of whatever perceived consequences I thought that would have, because that's caused me so much stress and fear that, looking back now, I really realized it was unnecessary. Like at the end of the day, really, people don't really care about you as much as you think they do. Like people don't really notice you as much. It's kind of like all happening mostly inside of our heads, So just to worry less about some stuff, that would have helped my younger self for sure.
That's so true. Yeah, that's so true. I mean, what you said about most people thinking more about themselves than about you, and that it's all in our heads. Yeah, Linda, thank you so much for taking the time to participate in the podcast.
Thank you again so much for having me. It was really a pleasure to talk to you, Jing. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next episodes. Yeah.
Thank you, Linda. I will link your socials in the description as per usual. And if you're a listener and you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate if you could take the time to rate this podcast or write a review on whatever platform you're listening on. That would be a great help. Thank you.